Some decisions don't announce themselves. They don't arrive as arguments or dramatic exits. They show up quietly in the body first. A tightening in the chest when a familiar number appears on the phone. A heaviness that doesn't match the words being spoken. A strange sense of relief mixed with guilt that doesn't feel earned. And what makes it worse is that from the outside, nothing looks wrong. There was no single betrayal, no obvious explosion, no clear villain. So why does staying connected feel like slowly disappearing? Most people believe cutting off family happens in moments of rage. They imagine slammed doors, screaming matches, final words spoken in fire. But for some people, especially the ones who feel everything, it doesn't look like that at all. It looks like silence growing heavier than speech. Like conversations that leave you emptier than before they started. Like laughing at the right moments while something inside you counts the minutes until it's over. And that's the part no one talks about because on the surface you're still showing up. You're still being polite, still answering questions, still playing the role, but internally something has already begun to step back. You start noticing that every interaction costs more than it gives. That after family gatherings, your body feels like it's been holding its breath for hours. That your thoughts replace small moments that shouldn't matter, yet refuse to let go. Was that tone intentional? Why did that comment linger? Why does a single sentence echo louder than everything else that was said? And then comes the doubt because you were taught that loyalty means endurance. That love means staying. That leaving is selfish, dramatic, or cruel. So you start questioning your own reactions. You wonder if you're being too sensitive, too fragile, too demanding. After all, they didn't hit you. They didn't abandon you. They didn't openly reject you. So why does your chest tighten every time you think about seeing them? This is where the confusion deepens. Because part of you remembers good moments, real ones, times when you felt seen, supported, even loved. And that makes the discomfort feel illegitimate, like a betrayal of your own history. How can something feel unsafe when nothing bad is happening? That question alone keeps people stuck for years. You try explaining it to others, but the words fall apart as you say them. You hear yourself minimizing, softening, adding disclaimers. They mean well. They had a hard life. They don't realize what they're doing. And maybe that's true. Or maybe that's just the language you learn to survive. Because what's actually happening isn't loud. It's subtle. It lives in the spaces between words and what never gets acknowledged. In how your emotions are received, redirected, or quietly dismissed. You notice that when you express discomfort, the room shifts, not with concern, but with unease, as if your feelings are an inconvenience rather than information. So, you stop expressing them, not consciously, not dramatically. You just adjust. You choose your words carefully. You anticipate reactions before they happen. You shrink parts of yourself to keep the atmosphere calm, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to disappear inside relationships that are supposed to be permanent. That's the paradox. Family is supposed to be the place where you don't have to perform, where you don't have to manage other people's comfort. Yet here you are constantly monitoring the emotional temperature, constantly adapting, constantly asking yourself whether today is a good day to be honest or a day to stay quiet. At some point, a realization flickers in. Not fully formed, not something you'd say out loud, just a sensation that the version of you they're comfortable with isn't the version of you that's real anymore. And that realization doesn't make you angry. It makes you tired because you're not trying to punish anyone. You're not trying to prove a point. You're not trying to be right. You just want to feel like yourself without bracing for impact. This is where people misunderstand the silence that follows. They assume distance is about resentment, about revenge, about unresolved conflict. But what if it's not? What if the quiet isn't a weapon, but a consequence? What if pulling away isn't about rejection, but about preservation? That thought feels dangerous to even consider because once you allow it, you can't unfail it. You start noticing how much energy it takes to maintain the connection. How many invisible rules you're following, how often you swallow reactions that would be natural anywhere else. And suddenly the idea of stepping back feels less like abandonment and more like oxygen. Still, you don't act on it immediately. You try harder first. You give more grace, more understanding, more patience. You remind yourself that family is complicated, that everyone has flaws, that nobody is perfect. But the body doesn't negotiate with logic. It keeps responding the same way. The tight chest, the shallow breath, the sense of shrinking, and eventually you notice something unsettling. The more you show up, the less you recognize yourself. That's when the internal split begins. One part of you wants to stay loyal to the story you were given. Another part is quietly asking how much you're allowed to lose before it counts as too much. And here's the part no one prepares you for. When someone like you starts pulling away, it doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels wrong, like you're violating a rule written somewhere deep inside. You feel guilt before relief, fear before clarity, loneliness before peace. Because distancing yourself doesn't instantly make things better. It makes things quieter. And in that quiet, everything you've been avoiding starts to surface. Memories you brushed past, patterns you normalized, moments that felt small but now look different in hindsight. You start realizing that what hurt wasn't always what was said. It was what never happened. The comfort that didn't come. The curiosity that wasn't there. The emotional attunement you kept offering but rarely received. And that realization doesn't land gently. It destabilizes the story you've been telling yourself for years. If nothing was wrong, then why did it cost you so much to stay? If you were loved, why did you feel invisible? If this was connection, why did it feel like self-erasure? These questions don't demand immediate answers. They just linger. And somewhere in that space, distance begins to feel less like a choice and more like an inevitability. Not because you stopped caring, but because caring without reciprocity became unsustainable. At this point, from the outside, people start to notice. They comment on your absence. They ask why you don't call as much, why you've changed, and you don't know how to explain it without sounding cruel or dramatic. Because the truth isn't sharp. It's quiet. It's cumulative. It's years of emotional weight adding up without a clear moment to point to. So, you say less. You keep it vague. You protect everyone's image, including your own. But internally, something irreversible has already shifted. And this is where the misunderstanding becomes complete. Because when an empath cuts off contact, people assume it's impulsive, reactive, emotionally driven. What they don't see is how long the decision was rehearsed internally before it was ever acted on. How many chances were given silently? How many internal negotiations took place? Snorts, how many times you chose connection over self until there was almost nothing left to choose from. And still, even now, you hesitate because a part of you wonders if stepping away makes you cold, unloving, different from who you thought you were. That question sits heavily in the chest. And it doesn't get answered yet. Not here. Because the truth behind why this happens and what's actually being protected hasn't been named, not fully. And when it finally is, it won't feel comforting. It will feel clarifying in a way that changes how you see your past, your family, and yourself. By the time distance becomes real, something else has already changed. You no longer feel the urge to explain yourself. Not because you don't care, but because you finally notice how often explaining never led anywhere. How clarity didn't create understanding. How vulnerability didn't bring closeness. You remember moments when you tried to speak honestly and were met with confusion, defensiveness, or silence. Not cruelty, just absence. And absence repeated enough times teaches a lesson without words. It teaches you that your inner world is safer when kept private. That connection requires calculation. That authenticity comes with consequences. For a long time, you didn't label this as harm. You told yourself it was just how they are, just personality differences, just generational gaps. But your body kept reacting as if something important was missing. That's the part most people never understand because harm doesn't always look like attack. Sometimes it looks like emotional neutrality where warmth should have been like being tolerated instead of felt. Like being known in fragments. And here's where the shift begins. Not at the moment you stop calling. Not when you decline invitations. Not even when you finally say, "I need space." The real shift happens earlier in the moment you realize that staying connected requires you to keep abandoning parts of yourself. That realization is subtle. It doesn't scream. It settles. You start asking questions you were never allowed to ask before. Why am I always the one adapting? Why does my discomfort feel like a problem, but theirs feels like reality? Why does closeness feel conditional? At first, these questions scare you because they threaten the story you were raised inside. The story where family is sacred no matter the cost. Where endurance is confused with love. So you push the questions away, but they come back. They show up when you feel lighter after not engaging. When your shoulders drop during silence. When you notice how much mental space opens up when you're not anticipating reactions, and that's when the discomfort sharpens because relief is not supposed to feel this way. Relief challenges loyalty. It exposes imbalance. It suggests that what you were calling connection may have been obligation. Still you hesitate to accept that because if distance feels better, then what does that say about what you left? This is where most people get stuck. They assume that choosing distance means rejecting love. But that assumption misses something crucial. The truth is many empaths don't leave because they stopped loving. They leave because loving required erasing themselves. And here finally we approach the core truth, not the comforting version, the unsettling one. Empaths who cut off contact with family are not running from conflict. They are responding to a lifetime of emotional asymmetry. They grew up learning that harmony mattered more than honesty, that being easy was safer than being real, that emotions were acceptable only when they were convenient. So they adapted. They became perceptive, attuned, hyper-aware of emotional shifts. They learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to read silence like language, to adjust themselves in real time. And that skill was praised. They were called mature, understanding, sensitive. What was never acknowledged was the cost. Because being emotionally aware in an environment that doesn't meet you halfway doesn't create closeness. It creates vigilance. And vigilance is exhausting. Over time, the empath's nervous system learns a quiet rule.